The aroma of warm croissants and freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a familiar comfort amidst the bustling energy of a Parisian morning. Blair adjusted the strap of her worn leather bag as she hurried down the cobblestone street, her mind already alight with the day's culinary challenges. At Le Petit Four, a charming bistro tucked away on a quiet corner, she reigned supreme. It wasn't just a kitchen, it was her canvas, and the ingredients, her palette of possibilities. It was here, in this haven of copper pots and tantalizing smells, that Blair first met Tristan. He wasn't a chef, but an artist, capturing the essence of food through the lens of his camera. He had wandered into her bistro one rainy afternoon, captivated by the symphony of scents and sounds emanating from within. He was drawn to Blair's passion, the fire that ignited in her eyes as she commanded the kitchen, her hands moving with a grace that belied their speed and precision. She, in turn, was captivated by his quiet intensity, the way he saw beauty in the everyday, the way his lens seemed to capture the soul of her creations. Their courtship was a whirlwind of late-night conversations over shared plates of exquisitely crafted dishes, stolen kisses amidst the intoxicating aroma of baking bread, and whispered dreams under the Parisian moonlight. They were kindred spirits, bound by their love for art, for creation, for the fleeting beauty of a perfectly balanced flavor. Within a year, they were married, a small, intimate ceremony in a quaint Parisian garden. And when Blair discovered she was pregnant, their joy knew no bounds. They poured their hearts into Le Petit Four, nurturing it with the same love and care they felt for the life growing inside Blair. The bistro flourished, quickly becoming a favorite haunt of locals and tourists alike, drawn in by the magic Blair weaved with her culinary artistry and Tristan's stunning photographs that adorned the walls. Theirs was a partnership forged in passion and dedication, a testament to their shared dream. As Blair cradled their newborn son, Liam, in her arms, she felt a surge of ambition. She wanted more, for them, for their family, for their legacy. New York City, the city that never sleeps, the culinary capital of the world, beckoned. It was a gamble, leaving behind the familiarity of Paris, but Blair was never one to shy away from a challenge. Tristan, ever supportive, agreed. It was time for a new chapter, a bolder adventure. New York City awaited, holding the promise of untold success and, unknowingly, the seeds of betrayal that would shatter their Parisian dream. New York City, a symphony of steel and glass, greeted Blair and Tristan with a cacophony of sound and a frenetic energy that was both exhilarating and daunting. Paris, with its romantic charm and leisurely pace, seemed a world away. They found their footing amidst the chaos, Tristan's photographs catching the eye of a prestigious gallery owner, and Blair securing a coveted location in the heart of Manhattan for their new restaurant. They poured their hearts and souls into this new venture, christening it Blair's Bistro. It was sleek and modern, a testament to their evolving style, but retained the warmth and intimacy of their Parisian haven. Tristan's breathtaking photographs, now featuring the iconic New York skyline as a backdrop to Blair's culinary creations, graced the walls, creating an atmosphere that was both sophisticated and inviting. Word of Blair's culinary genius spread like wildfire through the city's elite. Food critics raved, reservations became impossible to secure, and soon, Blair's Bistro was the hottest table in town. Blair thrived on the pressure, the relentless pursuit of perfection, the adrenaline rush of commanding a kitchen at the pinnacle of the culinary world. She had arrived. Tristan's career also soared. His photographs, now featured in prestigious galleries and magazines, captured the essence of Blair's food with a haunting beauty that spoke to the soul. He was her muse, her biggest supporter, and the quiet anchor to her whirlwind of success. Their lives were a whirlwind of glittering events, exclusive parties, and the constant buzz of their names whispered in envious tones. Blair, always the more ambitious of the two, relished the attention, the validation of her talent, the intoxicating allure of success. Tristan, though proud of their accomplishments, found himself yearning for the simplicity of their early days, the quiet intimacy of shared dreams, the scent of warm croissants filling their small Parisian apartment. The distance between them, once a subtle whisper, was becoming a chasm. They were two ships passing in the night, sailing on the turbulent seas of success, the light of their shared dream dimming with each passing day. The air crackled with an electric tension as Stellan Cross entered the room. It was a charity gala, a sea of diamonds and designer gowns, but Stellan, with his effortless charisma and an aura of power that seemed to precede him, held the attention of every eye in the room. He was a study in contrasts, his Savile Row suit a testament to his wealth and power, yet his eyes, a piercing blue that seemed to see right through you, held a hint of vulnerability, a flicker of something darker simmering beneath the surface. Blair, standing beside Tristan, felt a jolt, an unexpected pull towards the man who exuded an air of forbidden temptation. She had seen his picture in the society pages, heard whispers of his ruthless business acumen and legendary charm. He was New York royalty, and tonight, his gaze seemed fixed solely on her. "Stellan Cross, I presume?" Blair's voice was a husky whisper, betraying a hint of the intrigue she tried to conceal. "And you must be the culinary sorceress behind the city's most coveted reservation." Stellan's voice was a caress, his eyes holding hers captive. "Blair Moreau. A pleasure to finally meet the woman who has captivated this city's palate." "Tristan Moreau, Blair's husband. I handle the less glamorous side of the business, ensuring Blair has the freedom to work her magic." "A worthy endeavor, Mr. Moreau. Your wife is a force of nature, her talent undeniable." The evening passed in a blur of champagne toasts, empty compliments, and the subtle dance of attraction between Blair and Stellan. He was a master conversationalist, drawing her in with his wit and intelligence, his eyes reflecting a shared ambition that resonated deep within her. For the first time in a long time, Blair felt truly seen, her hunger for more than just culinary success understood. As the evening drew to a close, Stellan, his hand brushing against Blair's as he handed her his card, leaned in close, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "I believe in nurturing greatness, Ms. Moreau. Call me." The card felt heavy in Blair's hand, a tangible reminder of the temptations swirling around Stellan Cross. She slipped it into her purse, knowing, with a certainty that sent a shiver down her spine, that this was just the beginning. The line between ambition and betrayal blurred with each stolen glance, every secret rendezvous. Blair found herself drawn deeper into Stellan's orbit, captivated by his world of power lunches, high-stakes deals, and the intoxicating scent of success that clung to him like an expensive cologne. He understood her ambition, her relentless pursuit of perfection, in a way that Tristan, with his quiet contentment, never could. Their affair began slowly, a shared glance across a crowded room, a lingering touch at a business dinner. It wasn't long before Blair found herself inventing excuses to meet Stellan. A last-minute investor meeting, a food festival he simply had to experience. Each stolen moment, each whispered promise, chipped away at the foundation of her marriage. Guilt gnawed at her, but it was a distant echo compared to the exhilarating rush of adrenaline she felt in Stellan's presence. Tristan, however, wasn't oblivious. The late nights, the missed calls, the faint scent of Stellan's cologne clinging to Blair's scarf, they all painted a picture he couldn't ignore. He confronted her, his voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger, but Blair, skilled at weaving lies as delicately as she crafted her sauces, managed to deflect his suspicions. Yet, the seed of doubt had been planted. Tristan, driven by a desperate need to hold on to the woman he loved, started following Blair. He couldn't believe, wouldn't allow himself to believe, that the woman who shared his dreams, who held his heart in her hands, could betray him so completely. He tracked her to a secluded cafe, a place she and Stellan frequented, their laughter echoing through the cozy space. Peeking through the window, he saw them, their hands intertwined on the table, their eyes locked in a gaze that spoke of a shared intimacy that shattered Tristan's world. The world tilted on its axis, the familiar clatter of the cafe fading into a dull roar as Tristan's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a surge of white-hot rage, an urge to storm in and confront them, to demand answers, to make them feel the depth of his pain. But something, perhaps the last vestiges of his love for Blair, held him back. He needed to hear it from her, to see the truth reflected in her eyes. He waited, an eternity compressed into agonizing minutes, as Blair and Stellan emerged from the cafe, their laughter a jarring counterpoint to the storm raging inside him. As they hailed a cab, Tristan stepped out, his shadow falling across their path. The color drained from Blair's face as their eyes met. Stellan, ever composed, his arm still protectively around Blair, raised an eyebrow in cool assessment. Well, if it isn't the devoted husband," Stellan drawled, his voice laced with amusement. Fancy seeing you here, Moreau. Tristan ignored him, his gaze fixed on Blair, searching for a flicker of remorse, a hint of the woman he thought he knew. Blair. His voice was a raspy whisper, betraying the pain tearing through him. Tell me it's not true. Tell me I'm wrong. Blair's carefully constructed facade crumbled, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. Tristan, it's not what it looks like. Her voice was a pathetic whimper, unconvincing even to her own ears. Isn't it? Tristan's laughter was devoid of humor, a hollow sound that echoed in the silence that had descended upon them. What is it then, Blair? Explain this betrayal. Before Blair could respond, Stellan stepped forward, inserting himself between them, his demeanor hardening. This is between us, Moreau. Walk away. She's my wife. Tristan's control snapped, and he lunged at Stellan, his fist connecting with the other man's jaw. Stellan staggered, more surprised than hurt. He straightened, wiping a smear of blood from his lip, his eyes cold and dangerous. The fight, however, was cut short as Blair screamed, collapsing to the sidewalk, clutching her stomach. The baby? She gasped, her voice tight with pain. Panic choked the air, momentarily eclipsing the rage and betrayal that had moments before held them captive. Stellan, his eyes wide with alarm, knelt beside Blair, his hand hovering hesitantly over her as if unsure whether to touch her or maintain a safe distance. Blair, what's wrong? His voice, usually smooth and controlled, cracked with an unfamiliar urgency. Tristan, his anger momentarily forgotten, instinct took over, and he rushed to Blair's side. He cradled her in his arms, his heart pounding against his ribs as he felt a tremor run through her body. We need to get her to a hospital, now. His voice, though still laced with the residue of betrayal, held a note of authority that even Stellan couldn't ignore. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and the suffocating scent of antiseptic. Tristan, his hand clutching Blair's, felt a cold dread creep into his heart. The fear wasn't just for Blair, but for their unborn child, a child he now realized he might not have been ready for, but a child that was still a part of him, a part of the life they had built together. At the hospital, Blair was whisked away, swallowed by a sea of sterile white coats and the impersonal efficiency of the emergency room. Tristan and Stellan, two men bound by their love for the same woman, were left stranded in the waiting room, the weight of their deceit and the uncertainty of the situation pressing down on them. The silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of a distant machine, was deafening. Tristan, unable to bear the weight of Stellan's gaze, finally spoke, his voice raw with emotion. Get out, he said, his words low and dangerous. Just, get out of my sight. Stellan, his usual arrogance replaced by a flicker of guilt, rose to his feet. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but thought better of it. With a curt nod, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the hospital. Hours crawled by. The waiting room, a testament to human fear and hope, remained unchanged, a tableau frozen in time. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face etched with a weariness that spoke volumes. Tristan, his heart pounding, rose to his feet. How is she? The baby? The doctor's eyes held a mixture of sympathy and something else, something that sent a chill down Tristan's spine. Mr. Moreau, your wife is stable. However, there are some complications. The baby? Tristan's voice trailed off, his hand instinctively reaching for Blair's, only to find the seat beside him empty. The doctor's expression softened. Mr. Moreau, the fall triggered some complications with the pregnancy. I'm very sorry, but there was nothing we could do. Your wife lost the baby. The words struck Tristan with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back, his hand grasping the back of a chair for support. The world around him spun, the sterile white walls closing in, threatening to suffocate him. He had been so consumed by anger, by betrayal, that he hadn't stopped to consider the fragility of the life they had created together. And now, it was gone. As if in a daze, Tristan followed the doctor to Blair's room. She was awake, her eyes vacant, her face pale against the stark white pillow. Seeing her like this, so fragile, so utterly broken, reignited a flicker of the love he had thought extinguished. He sat beside her, his hand tentatively reaching for hers. Her fingers were cold, lifeless. He squeezed gently, hoping to convey a silent promise of forgiveness, of support, of a love that, despite everything, refused to die. Blair turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their shattered dreams, their unspoken accusations, hanging heavy in the air. Finally, her voice a broken whisper, Blair spoke. I lost the baby." Tristan's heart ached at the pain in her voice, the guilt that mirrored his own. "I know," he murmured, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "The doctor told me." Silence descended again, this time not deafening, but filled with the unspoken grief they both felt. Blair turned her head away, a tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. "It's my fault," she whispered, her voice thick with self-loathing. "It's all my fault." Tristan's initial instinct was to comfort her, to gather her into his arms and absorb her pain. But the memory of her betrayal, of the lies she had woven, of the love she had so carelessly discarded, held him back. He watched her, his heart a tangled knot of conflicting emotions, as a single tear escaped and traced a path down her pale cheek. She looked so fragile, so utterly lost, that a part of him, the part that still clung to the memory of their love, ached for her. "Blair." His voice was low, devoid of the anger that had consumed him earlier, replaced by a weariness that seemed to seep into his very bones. "What are we doing?" She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the sterile white walls of the hospital room. It was Stellan who broke the silence, his voice a smooth baritone that grated on Tristan's nerves. He had materialized at the door, his presence as unwelcome as ever, yet somehow expected. "How is she?" he asked, his gaze shifting from Blair to Tristan, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Tristan rose to his feet, his stance tense, his fists clenching at his sides. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. "This has nothing to do with you." Stellan, however, ignored him, his gaze returning to Blair, his expression softening. He crossed the room, his steps measured, deliberate, as if he were a king surveying his domain. He reached Blair's bedside, his hand reaching out to touch her, but he hesitated, his hand hovering in the air between them, a tangible symbol of their fractured connection. Blair turned her head away, burying her face in the pillow, as if seeking refuge from his touch, from his very presence. "Blair." Stellan's voice was gentle, almost pleading. "Talk to me. Let me help." "Help?" Tristan's voice was sharp, laced with a bitterness he couldn't disguise. "You want to help? You've done enough already." Stellan's gaze shifted to Tristan, his expression hardening, the mask of concern replaced by a flicker of the ruthless businessman he was rumored to be. "This is not the time, Moreau," he said, his voice low and controlled, yet carrying a weight of authority that silenced Tristan's outburst. He turned back to Blair, his voice softening again, a chameleon shifting his colors. "Blair, darling, you need to rest. We can talk later." Blair, however, remained silent, her face buried in the pillow, her body trembling with a grief that seemed to shake her to her core. Tristan, watching her, felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him, a primal urge to shield her from the man who had caused her so much pain. "Leave," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "She doesn't want to see you. She needs time to heal." Stellan's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with anger. "I think I know what Blair needs better than you do," he said, his voice laced with a possessiveness that sent a surge of fury through Tristan. Before either man could escalate the situation, the door opened and a nurse bustled in, her cheerful demeanor a jarring contrast to the tension that filled the room. "Mr. Moreau, your wife is being moved to a private room. Would you like to accompany her?" Tristan nodded, his gaze briefly meeting Blair's before he turned and followed the nurse, grateful for the interruption, for the chance to escape the suffocating presence of Stellan Cross. As they walked down the sterile white corridors, Tristan's mind raced. He needed to get Blair away from Stellan, to protect her from his toxic influence. But how? She was still legally his wife, but the chasm that separated them seemed insurmountable. He glanced back at Blair, her face pale and drawn, her eyes still holding a haunted emptiness that chilled him to the bone. The woman he had loved, the woman who had shared his dreams, seemed lost to him, a stranger trapped in a web of her own making. In the quiet sanctuary of the private room, with its soft lighting and muted colors, a fragile peace descended. Blair, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the day, drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams haunted by the ghostly echo of what might have been. Tristan sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers, his gaze tracing the contours of her face, searching for a flicker of the woman he had loved, the woman he still yearned for, despite the pain she had inflicted. He knew he couldn't force her to choose, couldn't demand her love back as if it were a debt to be repaid. He had to let go, to give her space to heal, to confront the demons that had driven her into Stellan's arms. As dawn broke, painting the cityscape beyond the window in hues of gold and rose, Blair stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at Tristan, her expression clouded with confusion, as if she were struggling to remember where she was, who he was. Tristan? Her voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. I'm here, he murmured, his hand tightening around hers. I'm not going anywhere. She closed her eyes again, a tear escaping from beneath her lashes. The baby, she whispered, her voice choked with grief. Tristan's heart ached for her, for the life they had lost, for the future they had envisioned together. He leaned forward, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead, his touch hesitant, uncertain. I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We'll get through this, together. Blair turned her head towards him, her eyes searching his, a flicker of doubt battling with the remnants of her pain. Do you still love me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Tristan hesitated, caught between the desire to offer her comfort and the fear of repeating the mistakes of the past. He had loved her with a depth and intensity that had consumed him, but her betrayal had shaken him to his core. Could he ever truly trust her again? He looked into her eyes, searching for an answer to a question he couldn't articulate, a question that hung heavy in the air between them. I don't know, he whispered, his voice raw with honesty. But I'm here, and I'm not giving up on us. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, whispered conversations, and a fragile truce born out of shared grief. Stellan, his attempts to visit Blair met with a cool dismissal from Tristan, kept a watchful distance, his presence a looming shadow that darkened the edges of their fragile peace. Blair, released from the hospital, retreated into the sanctuary of their penthouse apartment, a stark reminder of the life they had built together, a life now teetering on the brink of collapse. She moved through the days like a ghost, haunted by the loss of their child, the weight of her betrayal a constant ache in her heart. Tristan, torn between his anger and a desperate need to salvage what remained of their marriage, walked a tightrope of patience and uncertainty. He tried to reach her, to bridge the chasm that separated them, but his words felt hollow, his touch met with a hesitant withdrawal. One afternoon, as Tristan was leaving for a photo shoot, a familiar figure stood at the door of their apartment. It was Jillian, her eyes filled with concern, her arms laden with a basket overflowing with freshly baked bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine. Jillian, Tristan said, surprised and relieved. What brings you here? I came to see Blair, she said, her voice firm yet gentle. And to bring you both some comfort. Grief shared is grief lessened. Tristan stepped aside, allowing her to enter. He watched as Jillian embraced Blair, her warmth and compassion a balm to Blair's wounded spirit. He knew Jillian wouldn't judge, wouldn't condemn. She had always been a source of unwavering support, a voice of reason amidst the chaos of their lives. As Jillian busied herself in the kitchen, filling the apartment with the comforting aroma of baking bread, Tristan felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Perhaps Jillian, with her wisdom and compassion, could reach Blair in a way he couldn't. Perhaps she could help them find a path back to each other, a path through the wreckage of their shattered dreams. The aroma of Jillian's homemade bread, warm and comforting, filled the apartment, a stark contrast to the coldness that had settled over Blair and Tristan's relationship. As Jillian moved around the kitchen with a familiar ease, her presence seemed to soften the sharp edges of their grief, creating a space for honesty, for reflection. Blair, drawn by the familiar scent, emerged from the bedroom, her eyes still holding a haunted emptiness, but with a flicker of something else, a hint of vulnerability that Tristan hadn't seen in weeks. She sat at the kitchen table, her gaze fixed on the swirling steam rising from a mug of chamomile tea Jillian had placed before her. Tristan watched her, his heart aching at the sight of her fragility, the pain she carried like a physical weight on her shoulders. Jillian, ever perceptive, placed a comforting hand on Blair's shoulder. "It's all right to grieve, Blair," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "Don't try to bottle it up. Let it out. Let Tristan help you." Blair's shoulders shook with a sob, the dam of her grief finally breaking. Tristan, overcome by a wave of protectiveness, reached for her, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight as she wept, her tears soaking into his shirt. As Blair's sobs subsided, Jillian spoke again, her voice a beacon of reason amidst the storm of their emotions. "Blair, you've made some mistakes. We all do, but it's not too late to make things right." Blair looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression a mixture of hope and despair. "How can I ever make things right?" she whispered, her voice choked with guilt. "I've lost everything. Our baby, Tristan, myself." Jillian's gaze was steady, filled with a compassion that seemed to reach into Blair's very soul. "You haven't lost yourself, Blair," she said, her voice firm. "You've just lost your way. But you can find your way back. You have a choice to make. Choose wisely." Jillian's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Blair, exhausted from her emotional outpouring, leaned back against Tristan's chest, seeking solace in his warmth, the familiar scent of his cologne a bittersweet reminder of their shared past. She had made choices, driven by ambition, by a hunger for something more than the life she had built with Tristan. Those choices had led her down a path of deceit, of betrayal, a path that had culminated in the loss of their child, the fracturing of their marriage. Now, faced with the wreckage of her decisions, she felt a profound sense of emptiness, a hollowness that no amount of success, no amount of Stellan's attention, could fill. Tristan, sensing her shift in mood, held her tighter, his hand gently stroking her hair. He didn't speak, didn't offer empty platitudes or promises of forgiveness. He simply held her, offering a silent haven of support, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped her. Jillian, wise enough to recognize the unspoken dialogue unfolding between them, cleared the table, her movements quiet, unobtrusive. Before leaving, she turned to Blair, her eyes filled with a knowing warmth. "Don't rush into any decisions, Blair," she said, her voice soft, yet firm. "Take the time you need to heal, to reflect. And remember, the choices you make now will shape your future, for better or for worse." With a gentle squeeze of Blair's shoulder, Jillian left, taking the scent of freshly baked bread and the promise of hope with her. The apartment felt strangely empty, the silence amplified by the echoes of their unspoken thoughts. Blair looked up at Tristan, her eyes filled with a vulnerability he hadn't seen in months. What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tristan, his heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions, searched her gaze, looking for an answer to a question he, too, was struggling with. "We take it one day at a time," he said, his voice low, uncertain. "We figure out who we are, who we want to be, together." The days that followed were a tentative dance of rediscovery. Blair, freed from the intoxicating allure of Stellan's world, began to see the wreckage of her choices with a newfound clarity. The guilt gnawed at her, a constant reminder of the pain she had inflicted on Tristan, on herself. She found solace in the familiar rhythms of the kitchen, her hands moving with an instinctive grace as she kneaded dough, whisked sauces, and coaxed flavors to life. It was a meditation, a way to quiet the storm raging inside her, to reconnect with the passion that had once defined her. Tristan, cautiously optimistic, gave her the space she needed, observing her from a distance, watching as the fire in her eyes rekindled, the spark of her spirit slowly returning. He focused on his photography, finding solace in capturing the beauty of the city, the fleeting moments of joy amidst the urban chaos. They ate meals together, at first in silence, the weight of their unspoken words filling the space between them. But slowly, tentatively, conversations began to flow, hesitant at first, like a stream finding its way through a rocky landscape. They spoke of their grief, of their fears, of the dreams they had once shared, dreams now tinged with a bittersweet nostalgia. One evening, as they sat on their balcony, the city lights twinkling like 1,000 fallen stars, Blair reached for Tristan's hand, her touch hesitant, yet filled with a longing he couldn't ignore. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything." Tristan turned to her, his gaze searching hers, looking for the sincerity behind her words. He saw the pain in her eyes, the remorse that mirrored his own. He took her hand in his touch firm, reassuring. "I know," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion. "I'm sorry too." There were no grand pronouncements of forgiveness, no promises of a future free from pain. But in that shared moment of vulnerability, of honesty, a seed of hope was planted, a fragile tendril reaching for the light, a promise of a love that, despite everything, might still find a way to bloom again. The fragile peace they had forged was shattered by a phone call. Stellan's voice, smooth and persuasive, slithered through the receiver, a serpent tempting Eve with forbidden fruit. He spoke of a new restaurant venture, a culinary empire that would span the globe, a chance for Blair to achieve the recognition she had always craved. He dangled the promise of redemption, of a fresh start, knowing how to exploit the guilt and uncertainty that still lingered in Blair's heart. Blair listened, her hand trembling as she held the phone, her gaze drawn to Tristan, who sat across the room, his expression unreadable. Stellan's words echoed the whispers of her own ambition, the yearning for something more than the quiet contentment she had found with Tristan. "Blair." Stellan's voice was a caress, a hypnotic melody designed to lure her back into his web. "Don't throw away your dreams. Come back to me. Let's build something extraordinary together." Blair closed her eyes, Stellan's words swirling in her mind, battling with the memories of Tristan's touch, the warmth of his embrace, the quiet strength of his love. She had tasted the intoxicating allure of Stellan's world, but it had left her empty, hollowed out. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting Tristan's. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own struggle, the pain she had caused, the hope that still flickered beneath the surface. "Stellan." Her voice was firm, resolute. "It's over. I'm not coming back." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, pregnant with unspoken anger. Then, Stellan's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the silence. "You'll regret this, Blair," he said, his words a veiled threat. "You've made a powerful enemy." Blair hung up the phone, her hand trembling, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had made her choice, but the battle for her soul, for her future, had just begun. Stellan Cross wasn't a man accustomed to rejection. His world was built on power, on influence, on bending others to his will. Blair's defiance, her refusal to return to his gilded cage, struck a blow to his ego, a wound that festered with a cold fury. He wouldn't let her go so easily. He had invested in her, nurtured her ambition, molded her into the woman he desired. She was his creation, his masterpiece, and he wouldn't allow her to slip through his fingers. He watched her, his eyes cold and calculating, from the shadows of his vast network. He knew her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities, the secrets she kept hidden beneath her carefully constructed facade. He began a subtle campaign of sabotage, a whisper campaign that spread through the city's culinary circles like a virus. Rumors of Blair's erratic behavior, of her questionable business practices, began to circulate, casting a shadow of doubt over her reputation, her meticulously crafted empire. Suppliers mysteriously backed out of contracts, reservations dwindled, and negative reviews, planted by Stellan's unseen hand, appeared in prominent publications. Blair, already reeling from the loss of their child, the strain of her fractured marriage, found herself facing a new battle, a battle not just for her career, but for her very survival. She confided in Tristan, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "It's Stellan," she said, her eyes filled with a dawning realization. "He's trying to destroy me." Tristan, though still wounded by her betrayal, felt a surge of protectiveness towards her. He had seen Stellan's ruthlessness firsthand, the cold calculation behind his charm. He wouldn't stand by and watch Blair be crushed by the man who had almost destroyed their lives. "We'll fight back," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "We'll expose him for what he is." The fight was unequal from the start. Stellan, with his vast wealth and influence, moved like a phantom, his attacks subtle, yet devastating. Blair, stripped of her usual confidence, felt the walls closing in, her carefully constructed empire crumbling around her. Tristan, determined to protect her, rallied their allies. He reached out to Jillian, whose legal expertise and unwavering loyalty were a beacon of hope in their darkest hour. Jillian, sensing the gravity of the situation, assembled a team of investigators, digging into Stellan's past, searching for the leverage they needed to expose his machinations. They discovered a trail of broken promises, ruthless business deals, and whispers of a darker side, a man who used his wealth and power to crush those who dared to cross him. It was a dangerous game, taking on a man like Stellan, but Tristan was driven by a fierce determination to protect Blair, to reclaim the life they had almost lost. Meanwhile, Blair, fighting to keep her restaurant afloat, discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She rallied her staff, her passion reigniting, her culinary skills sharpened by the need to survive. She created new dishes, bold and innovative, showcasing her talent, her resilience. Word spread, whispers of a defiant chef, a woman refusing to be broken. Loyal customers returned, drawn by the authenticity of her food, the story of her fight. The battle lines were drawn, not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts and minds of the city. One evening, as Blair worked late in her kitchen, perfecting a new dish, she felt a presence behind her. She turned, her heart pounding, expecting to see Stellan, his eyes cold and menacing. But it wasn't Stellan. It was Millie, his loyal assistant, her usually composed demeanor replaced by a look of anxiety. In her hand, she held a small flash drive. "He doesn't know I'm here," she said, her voice a hushed whisper. I couldn't let him do this to you." Blair stared at Millie, a wave of disbelief washing over her. Millie, Stellan's right hand, the epitome of loyalty and discretion, standing in her kitchen, offering a lifeline. It seemed impossible, yet here she was, her usually stoic face etched with a mixture of fear and determination. "What's on this?" Blair asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her gaze fixed on the flash drive Millie held out to her. Millie's eyes darted around the kitchen, as if she expected Stellan to materialize at any moment. "Proof," she said, her voice hushed, urgent. "Proof of what he's been doing, not just to you, but to others. He's not who you think he is, Blair. He's dangerous." Blair hesitated, torn between a surge of hope and a gnawing suspicion. Could she trust Millie? Was this a genuine act of conscience, or a clever trap set by Stellan? "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice laced with a skepticism born of hard experience. Millie's gaze met Blair's, her eyes pleading for understanding. "He crossed a line," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen what he's capable of, and I won't be a part of it anymore." Something in Millie's voice, the tremor of fear, the flicker of honesty in her eyes, convinced Blair. She took the flash drive, her fingers closing around it as if it were a lifeline. "Thank you, Millie," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that surprised even herself. Millie nodded, relief washing over her face. "Be careful, Blair," she said, her voice barely audible. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." With a last lingering glance, Millie turned and slipped out of the kitchen, disappearing into the night as silently as she had arrived. Blair stood alone, the flash drive cold in her hand, a tangible symbol of hope, a weapon against the darkness that threatened to engulf her. The information on the flash drive was a Pandora's box of secrets. It contained financial records revealing Stellan's intricate web of shell companies, secret offshore accounts, and a trail of shady business deals that reeked of corruption. There were emails, texts, and even audio recordings documenting his ruthlessness, his manipulation, his willingness to crush anyone who stood in his way. Blair, working late into the night, pieced together the puzzle, her anger growing with each revelation. She saw Stellan for what he truly was. A predator, a master manipulator, a man who used his charm and wealth as weapons to achieve his goals, leaving a trail of broken lives in his wake. She shared the information with Tristan and Jillian, their faces a reflection of her own disgust and outrage. Jillian, her legal mind already strategizing, saw an opportunity to strike back, to expose Stellan for the fraud he was. They decided to bypass the traditional legal channels, knowing Stellan's influence would likely bury any formal charges. Instead, they took their story to the court of public opinion. They leaked the information to a trusted journalist, a woman known for her investigative prowess and her unwavering commitment to truth. The story broke, sending shockwaves through the city. Headlines screamed of Stellan's deceit, his corruption, his ruthless tactics. The public, once enamored with his charm, his rags to riches story, turned against him, their admiration replaced by disgust and outrage. Stellan, caught off guard, tried to control the narrative, to dismiss the accusations as the fabrications of a scorned lover. But the evidence, carefully curated and irrefutable, spoke for itself. His carefully crafted image, the facade of the self-made man, crumbled, revealing the monster lurking beneath. Stellan, stripped of his carefully crafted image, retreated to his penthouse suite, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking a city that had once worshipped him. The city lights, once a symbol of his conquests, now mocked him, a constant reminder of his fall from grace. He paced, a caged lion, his anger simmering, threatening to boil over. He had underestimated Blair, her resilience, her resourcefulness. And he had misjudged Millie, her loyalty, her conscience. He cursed them both, his voice echoing through the empty apartment, his words laced with venom. He would make them pay, make them regret the day they dared to cross him. He still had power, influence, and he would use it to crush them, to bury them under the weight of his wrath. He summoned his lawyers, his advisors, his fixers, spinning a web of denials, counter-accusations, and legal maneuvers designed to deflect the blame, to muddy the waters. He threatened lawsuits, promised retribution, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down the spines of those who served him. But the tide had turned. The public, once enthralled by his charm, now saw him for what he truly was. Investors pulled out, partnerships dissolved, and his empire, built on a foundation of deceit, began to crumble. He was a wounded beast, dangerous and unpredictable, capable of lashing out with a ferocity that terrified even those closest to him. The game had changed, the stakes raised, and the battle for Blair's soul, for her future, had become a fight for survival. The scandal that had engulfed Stellan Cross ripped through the fabric of New York society like a hurricane, leaving a trail of wreckage in its wake. Reputations were tarnished, alliances fractured, and the city, once united in its admiration for the self-made man, was now divided, choosing sides in a battle that played out in the headlines, in the courtrooms, and in the hushed whispers of the elite. Blair, despite the vindication of seeing Stellan's true face exposed, found herself caught in the crossfire. Her restaurant, though slowly regaining its footing, still bore the scars of his attacks. She was a symbol of his downfall, a reminder of his vulnerability, and she knew he wouldn't hesitate to strike again, to seek revenge for the humiliation she had caused. Tristan, ever vigilant, became her shadow, her protector, his love for her transcending the pain of her betrayal. He knew Stellan was a dangerous enemy, capable of striking from the shadows, and he vowed to shield Blair from his wrath, to stand beside her as they navigated the treacherous terrain of a city divided. Their relationship, forged in the fires of passion and tested by the storms of deceit, had emerged stronger, more resilient. The loss of their child, the pain they had inflicted on each other, had paradoxically brought them closer, forging a bond of empathy, of shared vulnerability. They found solace in each other's arms, a refuge from the storm raging around them. Their love, once threatened by ambition, by the allure of power, had been distilled to its essence, a quiet understanding, a shared strength. But as the battle with Stellan raged on, they knew that their love, their future, hung in the balance. They were walking a tightrope, one wrong step could send them plummeting into the abyss. As the legal battle with Stellan dragged on, a weary stalemate settled over Blair and Tristan's lives. The initial thrill of exposing Stellan's deceit had faded, replaced by a grinding exhaustion, the constant tension of living under a cloud of uncertainty. Blair's restaurant, though regaining its footing, was a constant reminder of the fragility of success, the precariousness of her hard-won reputation. She poured her heart into her work, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of the kitchen, the creative outlet of balm to her troubled soul. Tristan, his photography career flourishing, found himself drawn to documenting the city's underbelly, the gritty reality that lay beneath the glossy facade of wealth and glamour. He saw echoes of Stellan's ruthlessness in the shadows, the desperation in the eyes of those struggling to survive. One evening, as Blair worked late in her restaurant, a familiar figure appeared at the door. It was Tristan, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, his eyes holding a mixture of tenderness and longing. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, his voice a gentle rumble. "Thought you might appreciate some company." Blair smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. "I would," she said, her voice soft. "Stay for dinner?" He nodded, his gaze lingering on hers, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken bond that still held them together. They ate at a small table in the corner, away from the bustle of the restaurant, surrounded by the comforting aroma of simmering sauces and freshly baked bread. They spoke of their day, of their work, of the city that both challenged and embraced them. As they lingered over coffee, a comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the quiet hum of conversation from nearby tables. Blair, watching Tristan, saw the man she had fallen in love with, the artist, the dreamer, the man who had stood by her side through thick and thin. Blair reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on Tristan's. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Tristan looked at her, his gaze searching hers, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. He saw the remorse, the vulnerability, the woman he had loved, the woman he still yearned for, despite the pain she had caused. "Blair," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion. "We've both made mistakes, but we can't keep living in the shadow of the past." He paused, gathering his courage, his hand tightening around hers. I still love you, I always have, but I need to know, where do we go from here?" The question hung heavy in the air, a challenge, a plea. Blair's heart ached with a longing that mirrored his own. She had tasted freedom, indulged in the intoxicating allure of power and ambition, but it had left her empty, hollowed out. She had found her way back to Tristan, drawn by the steady beacon of his love, the unwavering strength of his support. But could she truly forgive herself? Could she rebuild the trust she had shattered? She looked into Tristan's eyes, seeing the depth of his love, the vulnerability that mirrored her own. "I love you too, Tristan," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I need time. Time to heal, to prove myself, to earn back your trust." Tristan's expression softened, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. He understood. The road to redemption was long and arduous, but he was willing to walk it with her, one step at a time. "Take all the time you need," he said, his voice gentle, reassuring. "I'll be here." The weeks that followed were a period of quiet rebuilding. Blair, determined to prove her commitment to Tristan, to herself, threw herself into her work with a renewed passion. She created new dishes, bold and innovative, drawing inspiration from the city's vibrant energy, the resilience of its people. She mentored her staff, sharing her knowledge, her love for the culinary arts, creating a team that was more than just employees, but a family bound by a shared purpose. She distanced herself from the glittering world that had once seduced her, choosing instead the quiet intimacy of evenings spent with Tristan, exploring hidden corners of the city, rediscovering the joy of simple pleasures. They talked, really talked, sharing their fears, their dreams, their hopes for the future. The wall of silence that had separated them crumbled, replaced by a newfound openness, a vulnerability that deepened their bond. Stellan, his empire weakened, his reputation tarnished, continued to lash out from the shadows. His lawyers filed frivolous lawsuits, his allies spread rumors, but their attacks lacked the power they once held. The city, weary of his deceit, had turned against him. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked, of power corrupted. Blair, no longer afraid, faced him in court, her voice clear and steady as she testified against him, exposing his manipulations, his ruthlessness. She was no longer the naive chef, seduced by his promises of greatness. She was a woman who had found her own strength, her own voice. The judge, unimpressed by Stellan's attempts to deflect blame, ruled in Blair's favor, awarding her full control of her restaurant, a financial settlement that ensured her future. Stellan, his arrogance shattered, his empire crumbling, was left to face the consequences of his actions, a hollow shell of the man he once was. The city that had witnessed their fall, their betrayal, now celebrated their redemption. Blair's restaurant, reborn from the ashes of Stellan's attacks, thrived, a testament to her talent, her resilience. It was no longer just a place to dine, but a haven of warmth and creativity, a reflection of the love that had been rekindled. Tristan, his camera capturing the essence of Blair's culinary creations, her joy, her newfound strength, found a deeper meaning in his art, a reflection of the beauty he had rediscovered and their love. They stood together, hand in hand, as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, a symphony of colors that mirrored the tapestry of their journey. They had weathered the storms, emerged from the darkness, their love tested, tempered, renewed. Blair looked at Tristan, her eyes filled with a love that had been purified by pain, strengthened by forgiveness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. "For never giving up on me. For showing me the way back to myself." Tristan smiled, his gaze mirroring the depth of her love, the promise of a future built on trust, on understanding, on a shared passion that had survived the test of time. "We did it together, Blair," he said, his voice a gentle rumble. "And we'll face whatever comes next together." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a kiss that tasted of hope, of redemption, of a love that had found its way home. The city lights twinkled around them, a silent chorus of celebration, a testament to the enduring power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring magic of a second chance. The end. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Blair and Tristan. Let me know what you thought of their story.